Good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great Thursday. We're going to take a look at this homework real quickly. I think for the most part, we were able to walk through all of this yesterday, or not yesterday, but Tuesday. So I hope that you feel very confident about the things that you're able to do. On these first two, I gave you the algebraic equations worked out, and you just simply had to figure out what was the justification that you could give for each step. Okay, so for this very first one, the justification would be given, okay, because that's what was given to us. Next, we have to look at what happened, what changed between the first line and the second line. And really, this changed and this changed. And so if we look, we can see that it must have been that 9 was added to both sides. So that would be the addition property of equality. On the next one, we notice that all of a sudden this is gone, and again, this has changed. And so we can see that the 7 became a 28, meaning we multiplied both sides by 4. And we multiplied both sides by 4 so as to get rid of that fraction. Now, we could have distributed that fraction, but 1/4 times 3x would have been 3/4 x, and 1/4 times 7 would have been 7/4. So that would have been pretty ugly. So instead of distributing that, we just multiplied both sides by 4 to make that fraction go away. All right? Let's see. Next, we can see that this 7 is gone, and this 28 goes down to a 21. So clearly, we use the subtraction property of equality. We subtracted 7 from both sides. And lastly, we can see that this 3 is gone and the 21 changed. And so therefore, that's the division property of equality. Okay, and the next one. Next problem looks something like this. And again, it should have been really easy to walk through on this. So the first one, we just kind of established that this is what was given to us. Okay, on the second one, we look at what changed. Well, the 5 becomes an 8, and this -3 is gone. So clearly we added 5 to both sides, so it's the addition property of equality. Okay, on the next one, we can see that this 8 right here is gone, and then this 8 changes to a 1. So again, when we could have used the distributive property, we notice that we didn't. Okay, this is something, again, we could have used the distributive property and it would have said then 88 minus 16x equals 8. And those would have been pretty big numbers. So one of the things we could do is we could divide both sides by 8. And so that's the division property of equality. And then lastly, let's see here, what happened? This 11 is gone and this 1 changed. And so clearly we subtracted. We subtracted 11 from both sides, so that's the subtraction property of equality. And then we're left with this -2 out in front of the x, and this -10 turns into a -5, which is a mistake. I wonder if anybody caught that, because if you divide both sides by a -2, on this side the negatives cancel out and the 2's cancel out, and this side the negatives cancel out. So this down here should be a +5, so that's a mistake that I have. And so, but either way, to get there would be the division property of equality. And it should have said x equals 5, not -5. Okay? All right, so that's what we should have had for those first two. And then in the book, there was 14, 15, 16, and 17. And I had asked all classes to justify every step, that you would kind of walk through this problem in the same way that we walk through these and justify every step. The book's direction said solve for a variable and then also solve for the indicated angles or the measured angles. So it's saying, hey, tell me how big this angle is, tell me how big this angle is. Well, they're vertical angles, so they'll be the same. So the very first thing I'd do to start this problem is I'd say, well, I know that 2x is equal to 3x minus 42. And I know that because vertical angles are congruent. Okay. Next, I could go ahead and subtract 2x from both sides, but that would leave 0 on one side, which there's nothing wrong with that, but sometimes it's a little confusing for people. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3x from both sides, which is going to give me -1x over here and -42 over here. And that's the subtraction property of equality. Next, at this point, I just have to divide both sides by -1, which would give me x is equal to 42. And that's the division. Or you could say you multiplied by -1. That would be no different. Give you the same result. Division or multiplication property of equality. And so now I have that x, what x is. I know that x is 42. So then if I take that value right there and plug it in for right there, then I would know that 2 times 42 is 84. And so therefore this angle is 84 degrees and this angle is 84 degrees. Okay? All right, moving on. Number 15. Pretty much done the exact same way. I look and go, okay, I know that 4x, let's see here, I'm going to scoot that over a little bit. I know that 4x plus 21 is equal to 6x minus 23. And I know this because vertical angles are congruent. I can go ahead and subtract, say, 4x from both sides, which would leave me with 21 is equal to 2x minus 23. And I did that because the subtraction property of equality tells me I can. At this point, I could add 23 to both sides and get 44 is equal to 2x. That's the addition property of equality. And then go ahead and divide both sides by 2, and that would give me 22 is equal to x. So that's the division property of equality. And lastly, if I wanted to be a super nerd, I'm sorry if I'm not calling anybody else a nerd if you did this, but you could spin that thing around and say x is equal to 22. And that's actually the symmetric property. We talked about that. That's the symmetric property of equality. And lastly, to now go, well, if x is 22, I could plug that in for either here or here, and it'll work the same. I could say 4 times 22 plus 21. 4 times 22 would be 88 plus 21 more would give me all the way up to 109. So we're saying that this angle right here is 109 and the one above it is 109 degrees. Okay, number 16. Start out the exact same way. We know that 3x minus 47 is equal to 2x plus 8. And we know that because vertical angles are congruent. Subtract 3x from both sides and we're left with negative 47 is equal to negative 1x plus 8. That's the subtraction property of equality. We subtracted 3x from both sides. We go ahead and subtract 8 from both sides. We'll get to negative 55 is equal to negative 1x. So again, we use the subtraction property. The first time we subtracted something that had x on it, and this time we subtracted positive 8. And then we either divide or multiply by a negative 1 to make that all the negatives go away. And it would say 55 is equal to x. And so that could be either the division or the multiplication property of equality. Because if you multiply by negative 1, the negatives will go away. If you divide by negative 1, the negative ones will go away. And lastly, we can say, well, x is equal to 55. Why? Well, that's the symmetric property of equality. And then we got to take that 55 and we're going to plug it back in. So I'm going to plug it into this statement right here. It's just a little bit easier. And say, well, that would mean that 2 times 55 plus 8. So 2 times 55 is 110 plus 8, which would give me 118. That must be the measure of those two angles. I could always check myself, make sure I'm right by plugging into the other one as well. If I plug it into this expression, kind of off to the side and say, well, that would mean that 3 times 55 minus 47. So 3 times 55 is 165 minus 47. If I take away 47 from that, I get 118. And check it out. It is the same answer here and here. And so that's good news. So that shows that I'm right. Okay, lastly, here we go. Set this one up. Same as before. 5x is equal to 8x minus 75. Why? Because vertical angles are congruent. Subtract 8x from both sides, and you get negative 3x is equal to negative 75. Why? Because the subtraction property of equality tells me I can do that. Divide both sides by negative 3, and you get x is equal to 25. Why? Because the division property of equality tells me I can do that. So now I know that x is 25. I can plug that back in right here. And so then I know 5 times 25 would give me 125 degrees. So each one of those angles is 125. All right. So that's what you should have had for your homework. It was pretty simple, pretty brief, pretty easy. Hopefully you did well. Stay tuned for the lesson that we get to do.